Welcome to LASCON again. How many of you were at my talk last year? Dave was, you were? Okay. So this is kind of a follow-on talk. It's the guy that hacked his garage door opener. This is a follow-on to that, what happened with all of that. I'll go into it a little bit deeper here. First, I like to do some audience polling. So how many developers? Wow, that number goes up every year, the percentage of the room anyway. Hackers? Dave, put your hand up. They won't tell you they're hackers, right? Serial killers all look like everybody. So my name's Jason, and I'm the CTO at a company called Aztec Consulting. What I'm going to be talking about today is responsible disclosure. I'm going to be giving you a little bit of context from the side of a researcher that found a thing and working with an organization to get them to fix that thing. And I'm also going to talk about what it looked like inside that organization to have a researcher knock on the door with some bad news, right? So who am I? I'm an AppSec professional. I've been working in the application security business, primarily in the vendor space, but I'm a consultant as well. I've done quite a few things in the AppSec space. My first SQL injection was in '98, so it's a guy named Bob O'Neill. There was an apostrophe in his name. I noticed that it caused problems, and that led me down a path, right? And a lot of people that end up like this works that way. I'm also a wireless and infrastructure security person. I read a lot of those releases that come out about things, but I worked as a wireless engineer for a while. I do a lot of stuff with APIs. We're all moving to this world where APIs control us, and I'd like to understand that. So I've been looking at that quite a bit. And I do a fair amount of work with a charity organization called Hackers for Charity. If you ever see somebody with a t-shirt or back of my laptop says, "I hack charities," we're not hacking charities. We're keeping them working, right? So our goal is to keep technology running in places where that's difficult. I tweet. Most of it's angry stuff to United. So fair warning, some things that you should probably know about me. First of all, this talk doesn't have enough Star Wars in it at all. You'll notice that later. I sent this talk to my boss and said, what do you think? And he said, not enough Star Wars. So that's in the fair warning thing. Anybody here hiring? 2 people in the back are hiring. What are you hiring for?
AppSec and Red Team.
AppSec and Red Team. I don't ask if anybody's looking for a job because you could be sitting next to the person that you work with that doesn't, you don't want them to know you're looking for a job. So if you go have a candid conversation with these gentlemen in the back, that's a good thing. If you want to do the type of research that led me to this talk, I am happy to sit down and drink beer with you and show you things. If you want to set your laptop up and make your cell phone work through your laptop, I want to do that too. So pizza and or barbecue might occur, but happy to do it. Please approach me afterwards. If you want to see the talk that I did about when I did the research release, it's on the YouTube channel. If you go to the YouTube channel for LASCON, I'm the still frame that they pulled out of the video. Me. Like, imagine what the talk, what the speakers looked like last year. I'm the one that ended up on the cover as the glamour shot, right? Please don't go hacking Equifax. It's not fair to pick on those that we would put in special classes. So if you learn anything here that you can apply, don't go after them. And I'd love to hear from you, so if you want to come talk to me, please do that. Also, I pace a lot, so I hope that doesn't bother everyone. First con? Anybody? Is this your first conference? 1, 2. Great. Welcome to this crazy little club that we have. You'll probably see some of these people all over the place. This mic is bugging me. I'm going to lower it a little bit. All right. So this all starts with you work for a company. Your company develops a something. It's probably on the internet, right? These statements are probably categorically true. What happens if you get a letter in the mail, you get a tweet, you get somebody dropping stuff in your web server logs, whatever that is, right? What happens at your organization if this call comes in? What I found out is if you haven't thought about that at all, this is going to be a very long process. It's going to be extremely painful for both people, or for both sides, both organizations, if you will. And it's going to be something that you really should be considering an incident, right? You probably have incident response policies, and if you don't, I'm happy to chat with you about that. But this is basically an incident that's occurring. No one has lost anything yet, you hope. But this is an incident that now needs to be looked after. A lot of people take these types of reports and they consider them to be like having a pen test done and getting a line in a pen test report. And I'm telling you right now, if some researcher has been banging on the door and figured out a way to get in, it's not a good idea to take that stance, right? You need to take it a little bit more seriously than, well, we hired a company and they ran an analyzer and it came up with a thing. This is somebody spent a lot of time on you, right? In my research, it took me a couple of days to get everything together, right? I made it work in like 5 minutes, but it was a couple of days of why is it working? Am I going to get penalized? Can I find another person that has this and move the problem, right? This is a lot of time that I spent on this. If I wanted to take it further, right, I could have. I just simply stopped at where I was and said, there's a flaw, I now need to notify these guys. And so I picked up the phone and I made a phone call. But basically, what I'm saying, basically I got curious, right? I got curious about things, and as attackers get curious about things. Curiosity is good, right? Drives us forward. And so I noticed that the internet is now a physical world thing. I can turn the lights on in my house from here. I can open my garage door from here. I'm having kinetic interaction in the physical world over completely virtualized communication. And so that got me curious, right? What does that mean? What are those things? So I wanted to look around my house and see, well, you know, I bought all those little things and plugged them in and loved it. What have I done, right? And so I walked around and I started looking at all the stuff that I'd plugged in. And I really wanted to understand, what I wanted to know was, could somebody break into my house through my garage door opener or unlock my front door or something worse, right? When you talk about IoT hacking, you often hear about, well, your Bluetooth signal is sending out your Wi-Fi password. If I'm close enough to pick up the Bluetooth signal or see your Wi-Fi password, I'm pretty close, right? In my opinion, the problem with IoT, or the problem that could become the problem with IoT, is our internet-connected refrigerators are all talking back to an API surface. What if I attack that surface and turn all of the connected refrigerators up to 80 degrees, right, and spoil all the food? Well, if I can do that kind of thing, right, there's worse things that can be done in more places. So that kinetic physical thing is something that I wanted to look at, and so I did. So what does that mean for you? Well, somebody's out there looking, right? If they haven't started today, maybe they'll start tomorrow. But pretty much guaranteed they're going to start. What happens if they find something? Are you ready for that? Is anybody ready for that? It's often hard to gauge readiness on that kind of thing. A lot of people like to hide behind their EULA, or their terms and conditions. We started looking at this little GPS tracking device a few months ago in our research, and one of the guys said, wait, the terms and conditions say right in it, you're not allowed to do security research on this thing. And I thought, well, that's a really weird thing. You know, don't do research on us. Like, didn't that chick at Oracle say that? So that seems odd, right? So we have lawyers, right? So I went to the lawyers and I said, all right, hypothetical situation here. What do these terms and conditions mean? And she said, basically, the precedents that are available, if you're doing this for safety or for security for the general public, this type of research is permitted, especially if you find something. And so it's difficult for any organization to duck behind their EULA or behind their T's and C's and say, oh, well, you use this in a way that you're not supposed to, we're suing you because you're doing this research for the safety and security of others, hopefully. This last line is important to understand. They're coming, they're going to be in, right? They're going to make their way in. It's going to happen. So you got to be ready, right? So how is the researcher going to get a hold of you today? Yeah, so if you have an active bug bounty program, that's a good way to do that, right? That gives you a good way to have communication, actually communicate with researchers. You may actually attract real researchers that people know. It's a good way to do it. Anybody else have a BUSAT or anything like that, some kind of email list? Nope. And that's the thing, right? So how are you going to get notified? Well, I sent a tweet, right? Chamberlain, you got this problem. The customer service guys, customer service these days is all hooked into Twitter, right? So they send me a thing back, DM us your problem and we will happily help you. So I do that. That looks complicated. Please call this number. So I call in and I get the customer service agents. Yes, I'm a hacker out in my driveway and I opened my garage with my laptop. Okay, let me say it different ways, right? So basically what happened was they were trying to talk me through resetting the pin that's on the wall next to the garage door for when I forget my transponder. They're like, well, what you do is take the battery out and you push this, and I'm like, hang on, no. I don't need this to get the door open. I can open the door. That's not the problem, right? The problem is I can open other doors, right? That's what I'm trying to tell you. I spent a lot of time just dealing with customer service, right? But how are they going to get to you? Maybe some website contacts, right? Maybe you've got something in your DNS records. You have to think about somebody's outside your organization and they're trying to get to you. Also, once the call comes in, what do you do, right? So there's really no standard way for a researcher to report to you. That means you probably have no standard way to further that, right, to push it forward, and that's something that really has to be considered. Eventually, we're going to get to somebody that understands what was said on the phone. So you're having an incident. What do you do for that? What's the thing that you have to do for that? When I was in the military, we had things like this posted at watch stations, right? This is the FBI's suggested, if someone calls in a bomb threat, what you should do, right? And if you go down through this list, it's pretty good. When is the bomb going to explode? This is what you're supposed to be asking somebody reporting a problem to you, right? When's the bomb going to explode? What's it look like? Why did you do this, right? You'll notice that questions section is pretty long and it's all packed together really tight. Can you imagine trying to, answer this thing on your first bomb threat, right? And then the exact wording of the threat. This is going to be hyper important for analysis later. It's freehand, you got to write it in there, you got to remember exactly, and that's after you've asked all this stuff. And then there's a bunch of this. Once you've filled this form out, who do you give it to, right? Does it go to the FBI? Does it go to your boss? Where does it go, right? So we got to have an understanding, what's missing here? Well, what's missing is the procedure after this. And that's where we really start to run into problems. So how are we going to get a hold of you? Well, here's a good place to start. There's a kind of a driving force these days of folks that are trying to put together security.txt, right? What we want to do is like the Favico, it's like robots.txt, right? This is, if you're trying to report to somebody, go to their domain /security.txt, and there's a format for this thing that you can stick out there to have people contact you. That's a way. Is it a good way? Is it a bad way? Well, we don't really know yet, but a lot of people are pushing for it. Hey, since I'm looking at your web page anyway, why don't you talk to me over my connection, right? So here's an example of the Etsy store. They have an X recruiting header, right, where they say, hey, it's code your craft, go to etsy.com/careers, right? They're talking to people in the way that they are going to see things. How many people are reading the X recruiting header right, that aren't really deep looking at the website. Give me that stuff. You know, you could put in the comments on your HTML. You could just simply put a comment that says, hey, if you need to report something to us, here's a URL that you're never going to find anywhere else. Click this link, right? See how gullible they are. It'll be good. There's a robots.txt. It tells the Google bots and the page indexers where they are and where they're not allowed to go. It's one of my favorite things to go pull when I'm looking at a website, simply because there's always sensitive data in here, right? I don't want you indexing my really sensitive thing. And so it's a great place to look for stuff, right? You'll notice this one's got a lot of forms in it. This is United's. They have a lot of forms that they don't want the bots to crawl. But why don't we just come up with a humans.txt? This is how the server communicates to the humans, right, in order to convey a message, something like this, right? So if you find a weird error, give us errors at, or whatever that might be. I'm saying there isn't a standard, but maybe we can create one. You can come up with a lot of creative ways to do this. But as soon as the call comes in, someone's got to deal with it, right? We have to triage it in some way, and we've got to move it forward into the organization. Could very well be that customer service is where they're going to end up. That phone number is everywhere, right? Oftentimes the sales number is available. For instance, if you want to talk to someone at Equifax, if you'd like to go speak with a human being at Equifax today, the only person that you can talk to is a salesperson. Everything else refers you to a website or your congressman or whatever, but you can call a salesperson there. I've done it. You got to wait through a bunch of VRU prompts and stuff, but once you get there, you can say things like, I'm just really interested in all this data that you have, but can't I get it cheaper elsewhere? There's keywords that you should be training your customer service folks on, right? They're around security and they're around reporting incidents, right? And really, incident reporting, responsible disclosure, and the words security should be something that they're listening for anyway. If you are not currently doing security training with your customer service group on a regular basis, there's conversations that we can have around that, but you should definitely be impressing upon them that security is important, reporting an incident to us is important, et cetera. But definitely, give them one of these things where it's, where's the bomb, right? Is it going to go off? Are you reporting a security incident to me? And I always recommend drilling, right? I was in the military. Drilling makes you ready for stuff, right? So running drills is never a bad idea, even if it's on an irregular basis, only once a year or whatever. But drills should never be punitive, right? They should always be rewards-based. Good job, you caught it. Or nobody caught it. So I finally get through, right? Series of tweets. They give me a phone number, I call. Finally, I get through to the organization. I explain to them, I found this thing. It's a replay attack against your garage door. I can open and close the door. I can open and close others' doors. I control the entrance to the house, right, was the thing that made them all perk up. Because when I started saying things like I can open the door and close the door, they're used to that activity, right? But when you say I can get in the house, well, they created a problem, right? So now they're interested in the problem and they're interested in the solution. And then I explained why I set off to do this, right? You don't always end up with somebody that's doing responsible disclosure that really cares about it. They're just, I found a thing, but here I was trying to get through. So eventually, they're going to get through to your organization, right? There's going to have to be somebody to talk to about. Or maybe they won't get through, right? If they don't get through, Brian Krebs is going to notify you, right? Or somebody like that. It's going to be important that you pay attention to the stuff that comes in. Someone's going to set up a time and you're going to have a discussion, an adult conversation with someone that's telling you there's something wrong with whatever it is that you have. These are not fun conversations to have, right? It's not going to be super pleasant. You have to be careful though, right? If I spent 6 months figuring out how to get in and I tell you I can get in, believe me, right? And try to keep me out. But you got to react carefully with this. The researcher might be a little unhinged. That's certainly true in my case. So I finally get through. I'm going to sit down and have a conversation with some lawyers. Isn't that going to be fun? Right? This is who they put me on the phone with, a product manager and 2 lawyers. Step 1, call the lawyers, right? Maybe have a conversation that isn't, let's go legal, right? The lawyers loved throwing around culpable and liability, right? Which I just threw right back at them, you know? You control the openings of lots of people's homes. Would you like for me to tell everyone that, right? You need to back down a little bit. So do they. So I wanted to have an adult conversation with them. So there's this guy out there named Jan Albert. Jan spends most of his time finding cross-site scripting on websites and telling people you've got cross-site scripting on your website. I worked at Qualys several years ago. We stood up a new blog. The guy that stood it up forgot to put request.validate in the search box. Jan found it, right? He was really nice about it. He sent us an email, right, and said, I've got cross-site scripting on your website. Here's your proof of concept, right? Here's a link you can click. Awfully nice of him, right? I was at the time in charge of that, so I turned around to the guys and said, hey, you forgot something, go fix it. So they go fix it, right? So I get on the phone with Jan because I want to understand his motivation. I want to understand what he wants. And his whole thing is he doesn't like cross-site scripting. Right? When I was at Qualys, everybody was like, see if he wants a job or does he want a t-shirt? You know, what is it that he wants? And he wants less cross-site scripting, and we've done that, and he's happy. But the thing that you get with this, and it becomes important later, and I talk about it quite a bit later, he's now going to tweet, thank you for fixing your cross-site scripting. You don't get off the hook that easy, right? He's still going to tell the world, I found it on your website, but he tells them after you fix it, right? Which is nice of him, I guess. Calling lawyers is going to definitely make the researcher take a big bite out of his chair, right? We got to try to figure out a good way to say, we need to have a discussion. There may be lawyers present, just simply because there's going to be legal water that you're treading on, but having them talk in the meeting is probably a bad idea, right? And making the lawyers be quiet probably won't be easy, I'm not sure, you know, because they're going to want to jump in and, why'd you do this, you know? So the point that I'm trying to make with all this is we're going to have to go through the standard workflow of change, right? This is called the Drek curve. When change occurs, this first step is, this change ain't happening, right? We're going to go into denial. We refuse to accept the change. We want to live in the past, where you didn't know about this and we didn't either. But then what happens is you go through time, you resist the change but are aware of it, right? Flowing through that, you understand that there is a need to change, and then finally at the end, you're going to commit to or conform to the change, right? So knowing that, your organization is going to go through this curve, right? When they call, the problem doesn't exist. Oftentimes when I hand in pen test reports, we go through the Drek curve, right? We don't have all these problems. Want to bet? So I thought I'd start with denial. This one happens to be in Africa. It's the Nile View Casino right there. That's where Hackers for Charity is. This is Jinja, Uganda. It's at the headwaters of the Nile, right? This is the beginning of denial. So it's an appropriate response when something is I'm not doing that. Like, that's too hard. How many of you guys have had some major change at work where everybody just went, we're never going to do that, right? We've all seen that happen, right? Sure. I worked for an ISP for a long time. We built frame relay networks all over the place, and then this weird IPVPN thing came out, and we didn't have to do point-to-point networks anymore. It's crazy. One of the old school network engineers locked herself in her office and refused to come out until we told her that we weren't going to do that. Right? That's denial. And it creates tension. When you tell the reporter who just spent 6 months digging in on this thing that it doesn't exist, he's going to either, or she is going to throw up irrefutable evidence or run away and tell everyone, which is what you're trying to avoid, right? We don't want that. And it's a little bit insulting, right? So what you should be doing is trying to figure out what the researcher's motivation is. That's definitely important, right? Perhaps they want bragging rights, maybe they want a bounty, right? If you don't have a bug bounty program, maybe they're trying to kind of coerce you into have one. They may try to extort you, you know, I'm going to put this information forward if you don't X. If that occurs, standard call law enforcement procedures apply, right? Like, don't let them extort you. Yes, they're going to get angry. You got to figure out what they, you know, are going to do from that point. But you know, negotiating with terrorists rarely works. So I have the meeting with them, and they say, well, we're going to go off and validate these findings. Now, during the meeting, I said, how many people are on your security team? And the answer was 0. So how they're going to go off and validate the findings is a little weird, because you don't know how to use any of the tools that I know how to use, right? I've been using Burp Suite for a while. You are just new to it, right? Setting this up is not simple, you know. So they're going to go off and validate my findings. They're not going to validate my findings, right? They're never going to be able to figure out what it is that I've done. And so it will roll you back around to the denial phase again if this isn't handled right. You have to give them a lot of information. They were silent with me for several weeks, right, when I was communicating with them. They're off validating the findings, and realistically they're just going off to do whatever work it is that they have to do. From the researcher side, I understand. I knocked on the door and said, oh, hey, your front yard's on fire. Right? Now they got to go put it out, but they already had fires going in the backyard, right? So there's, you know, a lot of stuff that they got to do. But you got to remember, communication is a good idea here. I asked for a meeting at one point because I was sick of them ignoring me, and I wanted to take the word redacted out of my slide deck so that I could go talk about this thing, which I had done. And it's CES week, we're super busy, right? Which I understand, you know, this company makes a machine that picks up a door because you're too lazy to get out of your car, right? But then they put it on the internet, like, and that's, you know, that's questionable. So, all right, fine. When unanswered emails, I was in fairly constant, like, hey, guys, come on. You know, I've got a sales background, you can imagine, right? But eventually, they get back to me, right? So my point with this stuff is, don't be this organization, right? Keep your enemies close. Keep talking to them, right? Because if you're keeping the researcher happy, they're not turning around and doing more research on the problem that they found, right? Because in this time, they may be going a little bit deeper. I may find a better way to execute this. That original Python script that I wrote to iterate through all of the possible consumer devices that would open doors all over the planet didn't work the first time, right? But maybe I could come up with a way to make it work. If you're going to keep making me angry, I'm going to put you in the public, right? And that's what you want to try to avoid. Treat responsible disclosure like any ongoing incident. Ponemon says in that IBM report that came out, it takes about 70 days to notice somebody made it onto your network, right? 70 days. What were you doing 70 days ago until now to change that? Probably nothing, right? They sit in your network for a long time. And so doing this kind of thing means that incidents become long-term projects, and they always are, right? In addition to that 70 days statistic, it takes another 100 to get them out of your network, right? So it's important to understand you're going to be communicating with this person a lot. After a while, the denial starts to fade away, right? And we start to move into the resistance phase. Maybe you're right. Denial for me meant them saying, that's really hard to do. How many of you guys have heard there's hackers in the room, right? You do a report, that's really hard to do. Who would do that? Right? Hackers, that's who, right? The people that want in are the people that do that. When I knew they'd moved out of that phase is when they said to me, well, I've seen you spend a lot of time on this, right? Like I see that you have buried yourself in this thing. And since I could name their API endpoints on the phone, like they knew, right? Like I've spent some time with this. So now we're moving, right? Now I know we're gonna start making progress, and this has gotta happen at your organization. The faster you can get down here and start moving up there, the faster this all goes away, right? But if you stay in the denial phase for a long time and never write any code, it's gonna be a bummer. But now we understand this is happening. We're really doing this, guys, and we need to go get it fixed. The researcher will help you, right? They started asking me questions. How would you hide our APIs? What is the thing that you would do to solve the problem that you're showing us, right? What are the things that led you down this path? Suddenly the communication became very fluid, very help us, right? You understand this. We see that. Help us. And the researcher wants to help you. In Jan Alberg's case, if you get rid of more cross-site scripting, he's won, you know? So let's help. Let's get some help. But have some respect for the researcher, right? Maybe they want some compensation out of it. Maybe they don't. Maybe they just want mention, whatever, right? Fly them out, buy them a steak, fly them home. Whatever that thing is, try to figure out how to make this equitable. You're trying to encourage a behavior of, hey, tell us if you find something in the future. The next phase is exploration, right? We've given this some thought. We're going to really work on this. We've engaged with an organization. In my case, they stalled a little bit here. And they asked me, like, what would you do? And I said, well, the very first thing I'd do is pen test this thing. Go hire somebody, and here's a list of organizations that do that thing. Get somebody to bang on this for a while. Perhaps stand up a bug bounty. I don't know, right? Like, you need to go after this a little bit harder. But here are the things that I would change immediately. And the first was pinning the cert off the mobile app. But they didn't have any idea how to do that. Where do I do that, right? You got to remember, people don't make mistakes. People do what they know how to do. It just so happens security counts on that, right? You're not making a mistake, you're just not doing it right. There's a difference. So when we start to really move through this thing, we see that there is a need for this change, right? And we've got to move. Your organization internally is going to go through this as well. And you got to try to keep them moving forward, right? In this case, moving forward meant they actually had to shift into forward, right? Which was a good step. And we started really moving down the line. For you guys, the researcher is going to offer solutions. Pay attention, right? Because it's the things that would have kept them out, right? So you want to pay attention to that kind of stuff. Some of the solutions are harder than others, right? Like, oh yeah, we're running on, you know, old IBM Java 1.0.4 stack, and we just can't uplift that thing ever, right? You know, that kind of stuff. Well, guess what? You still have the flaw. You need to come up with some way to get out of this thing, right? Full pen test, bug bounties, like, but you have to also look at what happens when we create a fix for this thing, right? Look at crack. How many of you guys have WPA2 running at home? Right? How many Wi-Fi routers? Right? Everyone in the room. Well, when they fix crack and it's fixed, how do we get that deployed onto all of your devices? Right? All of your devices, your mobile apps or your mobile devices, you know, your Windows, Mac, Linux machine that you have at home. Well, if you're on Linux, you probably already updated it, but the, the ramifications of we're fixing this could be wide and ranging. For them, it meant pushing a new mobile app, right? They fixed the app and pushed it, right? And now they've gone back and they've re-architected their back end. But the very first thing that they did was push a new mobile app with a pin cert, right? And some security things that I suggested for them. But you look at Charlie Miller and Chris Valasek when they hacked into the Jeep over the cell phone network, right? The impact of those fixes was pretty big. The cell phone network had to change. They had to fix all the Jeeps, right, or Fiats or whatever they were. They had to go fix all the firmware on those things. And then they realized there's a bunch of vehicles that are still out there that have the problem, so they mailed a USB key around to everybody. They created a new attack vector, if you want me to say that differently, and they had to go, fix all that. It's crazy to think about, but there has to be a way to push the solution out. And what about something really difficult like ATMs, right? Think about the responsible disclosure that Barnaby Jack had to go through, right? He called Diebold and NCR and said, hey, with a little bit of malware, I can just make the machine pump the money out, right? To which they were like, yeah, whatever, right? They didn't really listen. If you read the whole history on this, he went to them and said, you have this problem. They said, okay, we'll fix the problem, and then they went silent, just like everybody does, right? But then he said, well, I'm taking this to DEF CON. Like, I'm going to have an ATM pump money out on stage. That's happening, right? And it was really that, oh, yeah, this is going to go into the public eye that got them to get the lawyers involved, right? They issued cease and desist letters. They told DEF CON that they'd had to close. Like, it was amazingly vicious the way that they treated it. And he's like, but you're outside of the period that it would take to fix all this. But deploying new firmware and new software out to a bunch of ATMs is not just click and it goes, right? You ever been to an ATM at a gas station? You ever been to an ATM at a bank? They're different networks. The gas station ones are pull networks, right? They dial up and they go. This is a difficult problem, but it doesn't change the fact that Barnaby Jack figured this out, right? And should be able to tell people about it. It just, you need to now go fix your ATMs. And at the end of the thing, he did jackpot an ATM, right? But the responsible disclosure that he had to go through was extremely painful. He had to go through another one with the medical stuff that he did. And unfortunately, we lost him in 2013. So eventually, they're going public. People are going to talk about it. It's going to be amazing, right? Now, whether that going public means, oh yeah, we can find 143 million Americans' records in this one website that only charges 6 Bitcoin for it, or going public could very well be tweeting about it, hanging signs off freeways. Who knows? You don't get to control it, right? So that's the tough bit in all this. When it comes out, you lost control of this fact. You need to be ahead of it before it goes public. If it's fix your mobile app, have that push out, right? And just work with the researcher. Hey, we're pushing tomorrow. It's going to populate out on the servers. Everybody's going to get their update tomorrow night. Please don't talk about it until Saturday, right? And that's an easy conversation to have. You should expect, though, 30 days from the day that a responsible disclosure occurs, 30 days from the day that I tell you you have a problem, I'm telling the world you have a problem. That's the assumption, right? In my case, I negotiated 180 days with them. They were pitifully difficult to deal with, but they were extremely happy that they were getting it fixed. They were just really slow at it, like they make a machine that picks up a door. You got to, keep that in mind. But eventually, you will lose control of this information and when it gets disseminated. And I want to belabor that point for a second. You're going to lose control of this information. That is happening. So you need to be ready for that, right? Now, whether that's your PR team, like in the case of Equifax needed to hire a new one, Or in the case of, Oracle with the CTO going crazy, you need a little bit better PR team, one that has empathy for the problem, one that has empathy for the people that are affected by it. But you will lose control, and the day that it happens, you need to react correctly. Now, you could be in control of the information. You could say, a security researcher called us and told us we had a flaw. That's why you got a push last night, right? Now you're all positive, ahead of it. You're moving forward, right? Rather than being reactive. So some key words, some things that you'll notice in your organization when you're moved to the exploring phase, and what the researcher will notice is that you're starting to ask a lot more questions, right? Is there a way that we can solve this problem? Is there a way that you can help us more? How do we take a look at this in a much deeper way? And then maybe offer a beta option, right? You get to see it before everybody else. Tell me if you think we fixed it. Could you bang on it again? Hey man, free research, right? It's not a bad idea. And once you get through all that, then you're moving into commitment. We're going to solve this problem, or at least we're going to tell people we solved this problem, right? And you're going to move toward that, and that's great. We're going to go get to work, right? Chamberlain back, and they went and tightened the security up on it. They pinned the cert. The very first action they did was they pinned the cert. I was happy with that. That was a great first step, right? It proves to be more difficult now to do the things that I did, right? And then they started moving down the line a little bit further, right? And they did things like, if you violate the certificate, they invalidate the session that you presented, right? That's a nice way to do that. Now I got to log back in again. I got to have cert negotiation work. You won't let me get to the login page if my cert isn't right. That's a nice, first step, if you will. There's a lot more that they need to do with the way they do things, but it was a pretty good, kind of limp in to this. If you publish a fix and start working on things and you get it out there, this is a great time to review. How did the incident go, right? It's a good time to post-mortem what happened. When did they call you first? When was it fixed? Develop a timeline on it. When did we have that meeting with the lawyers, right? And start to look at how will we react to the next one. There's the next one coming, right? Somebody's always looking at things, and you may have to be worried about that. Were you easy to get a hold of? It's a good question for the researcher, right? How hard was it for you to get to me? How many layers of stuff were in between, right? At any point were you dismissive of the findings or of the researcher, right? That's something that you really need to look at and consider. Did you appreciate it? Did you show them, right? Like I say, your alternative notification path is Brian Krebs, right? And that's not the way that you want it to work. You want to be a little bit more in front of this kind of stuff. Was a disclosure in any way helpful finding some other flaw or some other bug that you had? If that's the case, that researcher needs credit on that too, right? We looked at the thing you told us about and noticed this other thing. Thank you very much for finding these two things, right? It's really awesome of you. In summary, people need to do their own research, right? Somebody's going to call you someday and say there's a thing. But realistically, you should know your perimeter. Where are they going to be doing this research? Where is the attack point, right? How can they get to me? You need to be approachable, right? Some of these are just soft skills. Maybe you need to get on their side, right? A bug bounty program was brought up earlier is a great idea. The bug crowd guys are here. Go chat with them about it. I do that stuff. I'm sure Dave does that stuff since he works on that integration. There's, plenty of opportunity to work things out there. Yeah, it's, when I'm hacking you and don't tell you about it, it really depends, right? Like a lot of times you'll see somebody just banging on you that's, you're trying to hit my WP-admin, I don't have one. That's a bot, right? That's not research. It's when really they're trying to find a specific thing and notify you of it, right? I really wanted to know, can I open the garage? Right? That's what I wanted to know. Yep.
Two questions. What's BERT And how do I sell this to my boss?
So Burp is a attack proxy. It allows for you to sit, it sits in between your web browser and what it is that you're doing, and basically logs all of the things that your browser does. Don't fall into the trap of going to Ticketmaster.com because it will crash Burp because Ticketmaster is crazy. But if you go to any other website, you'll actually see, like, I typed in my username and password and hit enter. I get to see where the username and password is in the datagram that gets sent back to the web server. So it's a really great tool for that. What I did was I hooked it up inside my laptop to listen to my wireless interface. And then I joined the wireless network with my phone. And then all of my apps, everything my phone was doing at that point was going over Burp. And I could watch it and then replay it and do whatever I wanted with it. That's how it worked. One of the things that I like to make sure that I get put out in any of these talks is I'm an educator. I love education. If you want to be educated in this thing, I want to sit down and educate you. So if you would like to have a session where we set this all up and make it work, or I hack stuff, or whatever that is, I want to do that, right? Like I said in the beginning, that usually occurs over beers and jokes. And I used to be in the Navy. A lot of my friends will tell you, you put a couple of beers in this guy and the stories are awesome. So I'm happy to go do all that. If you're too shy to raise your hand and say, yeah, let's do that or whatever, I'm pretty easy to get a hold of. I'm on LinkedIn, Twitter. Please come, right? I'm happy to educate folks and I want to. Every year I do this thanks to the LASCON staff because they put together an awesome conference every year. If you want to attend good application security conferences, there are 3 in my opinion. AppSec USA, which occurred this year at Disney, LASCON, and he's sitting on the edge of his chair, AppSec Cali. Those are all really good application security conferences. The staff here is always amazing. Bring back the video games. And, and they're always really good folks to work with. There are vendors here. Everyone hates a vendor. Please don't hate a vendor, right? They're trying to help solve problems. They paid a lot of money to sit out there and watch you eat, nachos. Stop by. Ask them what they do, right? Sometimes they have things that might help you. Sometimes they don't. So take a look at it, right? And for the last point here, everybody in the room gets 10 style points. You can apply them any way that you'd like. How do you sell it to your boss? I'll give you a card. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, everybody.